Hello and welcome to another edition of Lean Catalyst. I am your interviewer and host, Damon Baker. I'm the CEO of Lean Focus. In this dynamic monthly 1-hour interview series, we will bring together like-minded CEOs and leaders who successfully embrace lean thinking in their organizations to drive exceptional results. And through these captivating conversations, we're going to dive into their remarkable achievements, uncovering the strategies, insights, and practical wisdom that have propelled their organizations forward. Each series is going to feature an in-depth interview with the distinguished CEO who's demonstrated extraordinary leadership in leveraging lean principles. It's a great opportunity for them to share their experiences, their strategies, and of course their values with others that we can all apply to our own leadership journeys. Without further ado, it is my honor to introduce you to John Marotta. Hello, John.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So John has over 20 years of experience in the medical device platform, also life sciences and diagnostics, and he's been focused on business transformation in turnaround, growth, M&A, and carve-outs. He brings a strong commitment to driving business performance, serving customers, employees, and shareholders. Some more on his bio. John has recently served as the Chief Executive Officer and Chairman for PHC Group, which is formerly Panasonic Healthcare, and they are a $3 billion diversified global life sciences, diagnostics, and medical device company focused on precision healthcare with over 10,000 employees globally in 125 countries. John has led the company to an IPO on the Tokyo Stock Exchange with private equity investors KKR, Mitsui & Co., and L. Catterton. Before his role at PHC Group, John was the president of Epredia, which is also a PHC Group operating company. And Epredia was a life sciences carve-out from Thermo Fisher Scientific. Prior to PHC Group, John was a senior vice president of Invista Holdings, which is another dental medical device spinout, and this one was from Danaher Corporation. On the education front, John has a Bachelor in Science from the University of Dayton Flyer, and an MBA from the University of Denver. Does that sound like you, John?
It does, Damon. Thank you for that gracious introduction. Very kind of you.
You're welcome. So a few quick announcements to the people who are joining us. So you will all be placed in listen-only mode. And at the end of today's interview, there will be about 10 or 15 minutes or so for Q&A. Some of you have actually submitted some questions in advance. I'm going to be moderating those questions to John when we get to that segment. If you have a question that you'd like John to ask or answer, in the display panel in the GoToWebinar, you'll see this questions box. You can enter your questions in there, and I'm going to moderate those on a first come, first served basis. In addition to this interview, there is a handout that comes alongside the interview, and it's a PDF attachment which you can actually download during the interview. It's called Becoming a Lean CEO. There are 14 self-reflection questions which you can share with your leadership, or if you are a CEO yourself, work through those questions with your team to see how you fare on a maturity standpoint in terms of your organization's lean maturity. For those that haven't joined this webinar live, the recording of this webinar is going to be emailed to you about a day or two after the webinar concludes. And if you do not receive that email, please make sure that Lean Focus is in your safe senders list, because sometimes the emails go to spam. All right, so we're going to get into it. You ready, John?
I'm ready.
So I'm going to start out.
Nervous, Damon. I'm nervous. I'm nervous. I know you're tough.
You should be. You should be.
You're tough on everyone.
It's like Larry King. I'm going to ask you all the hard-hitting questions, except I don't have suspenders on.
That's great. Yeah.
So let's start off with what's a fun fact or an interesting tidbit about John that people might not know about you?
I grew up in small town Ohio, and I was an Eagle Scout. Back, I think, when Eagle Scouts being an Eagle Scout meant something. And on occasion, I'll play that didgeridoo in the corner of my office for my kids. So that's pretty comical.
So you actually can make sounds out of a
I
didgeridoo?
I can. I can. I
You're
can.
one of the first people I've ever met that hasn't lived in Australia that can play an actual didgeridoo. Yeah,
Well, I didn't say I could play it well, but I can make sounds out of it.
yeah,
And they
yeah.
laugh really hard. So that's fun.
That is so funny. So we may ask you to play the didgeridoo at some time during this interview. So talk to us about your lean journey. So,
Yeah, sure.
take us back to the beginning when you first became exposed to lean principles. What was the situation? What did you learn from it? How long ago was that? So take us backwards in time.
Yeah, I'll take you back in time. I mean, actually, there was a number of, uh, I would say, milestones in my lean journey. It began as a child, actually. I grew up in a greenhouse business, and so we had a horticulture business, an agriculture business, more on the horticulture side. So, and my neighbor was also a Japanese engineer. So when you're dealing with live plants, you have to strip waste out of the process, or your product will die. So all of our potting areas were in the U-shape, kind of a classic lean implementation where the individuals potting the plants. It was a U-shaped, very, very efficient organization from a production perspective. Our distribution and warehouse was one piece flow. It came in one side, it exited another. And so we were always 5Sing. My father was very involved in making sure the process was very efficient because we had live products. And I mean, there's no greater example that you could ask for in lean, where you knew from a feedback perspective where you failed, your product would die. So you made sure that it was implemented correctly. So that was kind of the first step in my lean journey.
Yeah. Did you guys know it as lean back then, or did you just think of it as like practical gardening, common sense?
It was just common sense, bluntly. I mean, my neighbor would come in and kind of, on the edges, want us to do a couple things, but we didn't have a choice but to do it that way. Um, and so I don't think, I mean, this was a very long time ago. I don't think lean was a term that was thrown around bluntly. I mean, people knew things from the Toyota production system, but it really wasn't kind of dubbed or marketed as lean back then.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. So, um, so I gave a little introduction in your bio about PHC Group, but we haven't talked
Sure,
about Patient Square Capital. Do you
sure.
want to talk to the audience about your role now at Patient Square Capital and what you're attempting to do, and maybe think about like how you're thinking about bringing lean into this role and what that looks like?
Absolutely. So, Patient Square Capital we are a healthcare focused private equity firm. We have 4 billion in our first fund, call it 3.9 in our first fund. It's over 3 years. This was founded by the former head of healthcare at KKR, Jim Momtazi, and a lot of the healthcare team from KKR left and started this firm. We do anywhere from 25, $50 million checks. We've done the $8 billion take private. Of the 12 deals we've done, 6 of those have been take privates. We lean into complexity in really 2 areas. We lean into complexity around operational complexity and technical complexity, and we're staffed to do that in both of those areas. We officially have 8 billion of AUM. We've got an interesting co-invest model, but we do all things healthcare, products, services. So life sciences, tools, diagnostics, and medical devices is really my remit in the organization to help build out a portfolio and a platform there, just sitting on the sidelines as an operator.
Yeah. And as you think about your prior career experience in using lean principles, both at Danaher and Invista and several other companies, how are you thinking about it? Or maybe you aren't thinking about it differently. Like, how does lean apply differently in private equity? So once you get an acquisition, what's your vision or strategy for how you will use lean to drive value creation in a private equity transaction, and how is that different than a publicly traded company, for example?
Uh, the
Or could
way
it?
the way I would think about it is on one hand, lean is very much at the forefront of how we think about operational improvements, driving growth, driving gross margin expansion, and those sorts of things. I can get into it in terms of R&D growth or commercial execution, those sorts of things. But if you think about a lean journey and the advantage of a lean journey, if you are not going to be transacting the business after, whether that be 3, 5, 7, 9 years, which is our typical hold period, there is an advantage to like say a Danaher, a GE, a Amazon that is very, very lean focused actually, that over generations can drive improvements. And when you have individuals that are in those roles over decades, over a longer period of time, there's institutional knowledge that you don't lose. And so that's helpful. But in private equity, there is a framework that we utilize out of the lean toolkit to drive performance in the business. And so one of those, I would say, from the people structure process perspective, people, it's really important to get that right in your lean journey. And if you don't get that right, you have to move very quickly because you don't have the benefit of time. Uh, and so the margin of error is pretty high.
Yeah, so I think time is probably one of the key differences, and you don't have the benefit of constancy of purpose for decades to drive value creation. You have to
No,
do the needle moving things as quickly as possible to pay off within the hold period.
that's
And
correct. One of my mentors, who's very close to your organization, Guy Schiller. I mean, there's when you think about in private equity, there's 30 seconds in a minute. You move very quickly. You have to move very quickly, and especially around being obsessed with customers. I mean, that is really around how you create value in these businesses. And so the definition of a customer at the end of the day is that individual that receives a product or service. And so we look at that both internally and externally.
specific to private equity, what is it that you observe or you believe, and this is your opinion, that private equity maybe doesn't get right about lean or doesn't understand fully about lean in general? Maybe not so much patient square capital, but just in your observations of the space of private equity.
Yes, I mean it's a good question. I'm going to actually lump a lot of different uh, different individuals into that question, whether it's private equity, whether it's publicly traded companies, whether it's startups, whether it's mature, quote unquote, mature publicly traded companies. When they look at lean implementation, I think some individuals just think it is centered around cost takeout and sitting in manufacturing and driving performance when at the end of the day, lean is about eliminating waste. And when you eliminate waste, by definition, waste is costly, it's confusing in an organization. So you're removing that. And what increases from there is quality, on-time delivery, top line growth. You see return on capital improve. You see cash velocity or working capital improve, and you see gross margin improvements. It's so if you start with that waste elimination from the customer and work out from there, I think most people get it wrong, not just in private equity.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say, it's like the mindset of waste elimination, it applies every function within the business can benefit from how do we eliminate waste within our processes to better serve our customers, whether they be external customers or internal customers, of course, both. And I think, a lot of the textbooks and, things you read about lean probably are not as voluminous on that subject, like lean applied to the non-traditional areas of a business and what that looks like with relative, description versus, all the books you can read about how it's applied to manufacturing. And, and it's hard to like hold up a lot of great company examples out there of where that's done well, and it's been done consistently well over time.
That's right. It's unfortunate um, because are you able to hear me okay, Danny?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you. It's unfortunate because I look back at some of the kaizens that I've been a part of, and if you look at, let's just unpack waste, for example. Who technically creates the most waste in a company? It's classically G&A. Classically G&A. G&A, we're sitting around, by the way, I'm at the helm of G&A.
Yeah, or your
Maybe
overhead.
affectionately overhead. And so you've got to be very careful in your role, whether that's in finance, HR, legal. You look at any back office, IT, on creating more waste for the organization, pushing more waste down. And so if you take the other side of that, you as a leader should be at the forefront in those various functions on waste elimination. One of the most thrilling kaizens I was ever in was in the legal function. And a lot of people say, how in the world could that be? Because you're not touching, you're not feeling, you're not seeing the actual improvement right away. I saw it culturally. I saw it culturally with a group of individuals that were just demoralized because waste was being pushed into their organization. And we said, let's go attack that. And so you have very, very smart folks in the legal function that went after this problem. They not only sustained it, but culturally, it enabled them to work on other areas to more serve the sales force, more serve R&D from an IP perspective in areas that were actually going to create value, then working on some NDAs or various contracts that there was so much wasted motion in those processes. And so the value unlock was tremendous. Well, they're having conversations with their contemporaries in finance, in HR. And so we had a multifunctional, cross-functional team on that legal Kaizen. It was thrilling from a back office perspective because a lot of folks we want to think that, you know, you can eliminate so much waste in manufacturing, which of course you can. And I've spent lots of times on the manufacturing floor doing that, and I have also thrilling stories around that waste reduction. It's very exciting to do that. But if you're really going to the hourly working and saying, let's just keep doing that there, where you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth because G&A is the culprit of most production of waste, but can also have the biggest impact on waste reduction.
Yeah, and if you strip apart a P&L, if you think about direct labor, in most organizations is probably 10% or less of the cost of a product, yet 90% or more of our focus around lean is aimed at that 10% or less the cost of the product.
That's
Um,
exactly right.
and to your point, like the G&A piece, managing and developing your suppliers, which oftentimes is 50% or more the cost of your product.
That's right. That's right.
It's a great point, and it's one that really speaks to the value potential that exists when lean can be brought broadly across the enterprise and not just in one particular area.
That's right, Damien. One other comment there. I mean, I'm taking kind of the other side of lean. I'm doing that very intentionally because I've been, you and I have known each other a very long time, and I've known a lot of the individuals you've had on in the discussion in Lean Catalyst, and And a lot of the examples have been in manufacturing, but I want to share some examples in other areas of lean that I think are really can drive a big impact in the organization.
For sure. As you know, going back to the PHC group role, I believe that was your first CEO role. Is that
Actually, I was a CEO early days before I went to Danaher and led an organization that we successfully sold to Cardinal Health at the time. So my first CEO role, where I knew absolutely nothing and still know absolutely nothing, because when somebody says to you, you know, are you ready for this role? The answer by definition, if you're doing it correctly, is no. But I've been training my whole career for this. So, you know, PHC was a thrilling move into the larger organizations as a CEO at the time.
were in your first CEO role? Did you, you know, you talked about your lean experience growing up in your parents' business at the greenhouse. When did you first become exposed to the formal discipline? Like, you know, you got terms for things, like the organization had something that looked like a business system. Was that in Danaher or was it prior to Danaher? We lost your sound. Nothing.
Can you hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
Thank you. Apologies, everyone. My first formal introduction to lean was at a Swiss company I was with called Synthes at the time. And Synthes was a Swiss organization in orthopedics. It was around a $4.5 billion business. I was in the trauma business. In Synthes, we had a North American distribution center and manufacturing facility in Colorado here. That's where I moved out to Colorado. I was running a commercial P&L for them. And I would go down to the plant. And what was really interesting, Damon, is we were doing things back. This was nearly 20 years ago. We would do Kaizens. Kayabe would come in. We would do Kaizens. We move a machine an inch if it gained an operator an advantage for the customer. He was the customer. He or she was the customer. And that's what really mattered. And so that was formally the kind of Kaizens. The other thing in distribution was around binning. You know, at the time, binning was the bin had to be static. It was, here's where these products went, this shelf, this bin, this area, all those sorts of things. We made binning dynamic. Binning dynamic means you put it where there's an open area. And the system at the time, this was JD Edwards. JD Edwards kept our dynamic binning where it needed to be in terms of having the operator, when they were doing pick, pack, and ship, the system knew where those products were. The heavier products were on the bottom, the lighter products were on top. Who did that help? That helped that individual that was picking for the products. That was my first real formal entree into lean. That was on manufacturing distribution. The other side of it actually occurred in the commercial side. And so that actually came out of Johnson and Johnson when I first started early days in my commercial days. And that was around funnel management, targeting the high value customers, understanding how to layer relationships in a commercial organization, understand how to forecast effectively in a commercial organization that ultimately drives operations in an S&OP process. So I understood it very well there. And my manager did daily management with me every Friday. And so it was really in J&J and Synthes that I was able to kind of get the formal lean vernacular down and understand how that drove a lot of performance in the company and ultimately value to customers.
Yeah. Did you think it was crazy at the time that we were moving a machine 1 inch?
Uh, I did, I mean, you could see all the holes in the shop. You go on the plant floor and there were holes everywhere. And I thought it was because I thought, is that just seems silly to me. Like we'd move the trash cans, we'd move this, we'd move that. We were 5Sing all the time. We were constantly, I'll never forget, uh, after one of the Kaizens, I walk into the break room with the plant manager. Okay. We grab a cup of coffee and he says to me, I grabbed the coffee. I moved and did something else somewhere else. He said, do you think we should move that coffee machine? I mean, it could be in the
Yeah.
wrong place. Like
Yeah.
the point of that is it sounds silly, but that was the mentality. Like, how do we serve our customers? And there was an obsession around that.
So talk to me about the culture that creates that obsession. So you get
Yeah.
into leadership roles. Now, how do you drive that passion, that energy, that commitment, and starting with like the understanding of these things to where
Yeah.
people act that way on their own because they can't imagine another way of acting and they wouldn't work for a company that didn't believe those things. So like how do you build that culture?
Well, you have to do it by example. I was asked once in an interview, like, tell me what your most relevant role is as a lean leader. And I said, every one of them. If you're doing it correctly, you as a leader are leading from the front. And that means if you're running an internal function, you've got to be obsessed with who your customer is. If you're in HR, you know who your customers are. If you're in finance, it's your business leaders. If you're in, IT, it is you have multiple constituents. So you've got to obsess around who those individuals are. If you're on the commercial side, you're out leading from the front, being with the customers. My first CEO role, um, I had a lot of good instincts around it in terms of I needed to be with the customers X amount of my time. I needed to be in manufacturing X amount of my time. I needed to be with R&D X amount of my time. And I was very disciplined around that in the organization, implementing one piece flow in our distribution center and manufacturing facilities, like understanding standard work, understanding driving, quality, on-time delivery, gross margin improvements, working return on invested capital. We didn't look at it from an M&A perspective. We looked at it from a broader perspective of every dollar going in, you've got to yield a return. Well, you have to obsess around the waste there and customer engagement. At the end of the day, if you've got to lead this from the front, and that means being out with sales reps. Means with being out with individuals on the shop floor, being in distribution center, pick, pack, and ship. You know, getting dirty on the floor and understanding what are they going through, and how can I help them. Getting into R&D, what are your biggest issues? Talking to product management, like what drove a lot of our assumptions around the product we're coming out with at the end of the day at this gross margin. And so having those insights and understanding, the only way you do that is from the front, no
Yeah.
matter where you are in the organization.
You're kind of touching on a number of things like humility, transparency, intellectual curiosity. Like a lot of these things are kind of principles that underpin a lean culture. So like how did you learn those traits and characteristics? And you told me a story. We met last Monday, and you told me a story that when you got your role at PHC Group, you asked one of the board of directors to coach you directly. I think right, and because you wanted to hear his opinion of how you were doing. Like so, you took the proactive steps to ask for feedback on a routine basis.
Right. So there's
That's
kind of
humility.
there's two parts to the story actually. The first one is, mentoring and coaching, which has to be, at the forefront of the game we're playing in business. So I'll tell you a couple stories. So, and then I want to get back to the PhD thing. Actually, let me stop and answer the question on the PhD thing. So the actual story was is our lead director. So I was the chairman of the board. Our lead director, I asked him to run a quarterly process in an executive session and have feedback, go in and get feedback from the rest of the board members. And if he needed to go into the level twos and get feedback, and every quarter we're going to have this executive session, and I want you to have an open discussion, A, with the board, with me present, secondly, with the board feedback without me being there, and then feed it back. And let's go have a very direct conversation and talk about what I need to improve on, what's going well, what's not going well. And, I always go to what's not going well. and, and, I think if you enter business or in any situation with a level of, again, there's a lot of things that you're going to know and understand because you've seen it before, but there's a lot of things you're not. And having the humility to ask for help, ask for feedback that's genuine. I really genuinely wanted it. And it just built a stronger relationship with those board members and those sorts of things. But I'll tell you a story. The first company I ran, I remember had a very challenging board meeting, which you want to have challenging board meetings, but not in the way I had one, Damon, to be candid with you. Okay.
Constructive.
Yes, it was unconstructive. And bluntly, it was on my side. On my side. And so I get a call at like 10:30 at night. I was still in the office. And this board member says to me, do you have do you have a coach, or do you talk to someone about this game you're playing? And I said, no. And he said, this was at the time when Tiger Woods was very good in golf. I mean, he was the best. And he said, Tiger Woods has a coach for a game that is pretty simple compared to the one you're playing. And it's a ball and a stick that he's hitting, but he has a coach for that. The game you're playing is much more complicated. It's a global game in business. I suggest you go find a mentor or coach. And from then on, I took that feedback and I flourished in that type of environment. And it was frankly one of uh, the best examples of someone giving you direct feedback and you taking that serious.
Yeah. And I would add to that, not only was it a simpler game, one could argue, but he was the best in the world. Uh, and
Absolutely.
and it's like, okay, the person who's the best in the world still needs a coach.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it was very clear from then, from that day forward, that if Tiger needed that, being the best in the world, I certainly wasn't, and I needed help, and
Yeah,
so I always asked for it.
well, that's great. What quality? So as you're building this type of culture within your organization and you're surrounding yourself and with leaders that embody some of these traits and characteristics that make this culture successful, what is it you look for? So if you could give us an insight into the mind of John when he's recruiting talent, what questions do you ask? What qualities do you look for? What experiences are you interested in to help build out the team? Because you're going to potentially be going through this here rather quickly if you guys make an acquisition.
Sure, sure. So first thing is around kind of the people side. In lean, it helps when individuals they've been in a lean organization and they've seen what good looks like. That's really important because if you're bringing that into a turnaround situation or a growth situation, typically it's growth, you've got to move into turnaround. So you're approaching it very differently, a more directive and then more of a learning type of culture following the turnaround. The importance of that is those individuals, those leaders are grounded in what good looks like. That allows them to go into a situation that is new to them. And so they can pull on those experiences. I think it's very important. Okay. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is what I look for is a part of the organization culturally that's humble, that's yearning to do better, that wants to serve their customers better, internally, externally, whatever that may be. And going in and using them as kind of a lighthouse to do the lean installation, whether that's on the commercial team. Let's make this up, for example. Maybe your US teams are the ones that want to bring in good funnel management, commercial execution. They're driving process change in their organization that allows them to sell more products at a faster rate to their customers. And we can go into detail of that. That sounds academic, what I'm telling you, but very real from an implementation perspective. Whether that's in R&D, R&D sees a lot of waste. Maybe they're not as successful as they like to be in their product launches, and going in and using some of those lean tools there. So at the end of the day, you can't do anything without the right people. And that means, do you have the right people from a talent capability perspective, but also culturally, or do they want to bring in a framework that allows them to cut the waste out of their organization? Once you have that, you build on it, because word spreads. Word spreads. People get excited around lean typically when it's done correctly, because it empowers them. They know the answers. Those closest to the customer have the most credibility, whether that's internal or external. And so those individuals are sitting around lunchrooms, conference calls, talking about what they were doing in Kaizen. Next thing you know, somebody in, if you go over to commercial or you go to R&D or whatever that first lighthouse was, word is spreading. The next one wants to bring it in. Then the next one wants to bring it in. And so that's the way I look at it in terms of implementation on the people side. You got to bring in some leaders that know what good looks like. That brings a productive tension to the organization and a shift in the mindset. And then you bring in the implementation of that. And ultimately, it's a cultural change. The tools are the tools, but you're changing the culture and
Yeah.
who they're serving.
What, kind of a flip side question, what red flags do you look for, kind of watch outs, traits in people that give you a good clue that maybe this person isn't going to make the cut, so to speak?
A couple areas of, I say this affectionately, like, well, we have all the answers. We've tried that before. We don't have any issues here. We don't need to do that. It's more on the cultural side where there is either A, they're keeping their distance from some of the leaders, and or they're saying that we've done that before. And so there's an issue that it hasn't worked. There's a reason that it hasn't worked. And so those are typically the red flags to me, where frankly, what that means is I'm going to even spend more time there. But, as a leader, you spend time where the greatest opportunities are and the greatest problems are.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit and just kind of talk
Sure.
about failure. Um, so much of what you read about in lean and quite frankly everything with respect to transformation is about all the goodness that came about, but there isn't a whole lot of talk about when it went off the rails, when it didn't work, what happened, why it didn't work. So as you reflect back on your career, you worked in a number of world-class companies that have lean business systems formally that they're deploying throughout the company. Just talk through some of those failures, maybe one that comes to mind that you think back on your career where like, I totally messed that up. And if I wish I had another shot at that one. And then what did you learn from that? And then how have you carried some of those learnings forward into your career?
Oh, so two things actually. I'll speak from a product perspective first, and then I want to speak to a speed and timing perspective. So the first one is on the product side. Like we were running hard and fast at a product launch, and we'd gotten good voice of customer. This is around, or this was in an implant business. We'd gotten good voice of customer. We were, driving hard at bringing these products out. I think there was 500 some SKUs at the time for this one system, and we'd done VOC. We're very effective in that. We had a very robust R&D process. And Damon, I'll tell you, we're manufacturing all the products, and we were probably 4 months away from launch. We had just gotten, we had just signed an agreement on a distribution agreement with a $120 billion company. They took a board seat on the company with the company, and we had started to get more VOC around the product, and there was a feature on one of the products that were not correct. It wasn't a critical feature, and I'll never forget this. And that product, it was a screw. So when you put a screw in the body, if it's not correct, you could cause irritation. And Damon, we were having a conversation with the R&D team, the commercial teams, the product management teams, with our new partner, our new distribution partner, and they're all looking at me saying, well, it's your call. What are you going to do? And we ended up not launching for another like 4 months. And that was supposed to be our first launch with that distributor. And going in and having that discussion with them, where we clearly, if you did a root cause analysis, we clearly didn't make some critical features where the machine shop and the tooling shop, you were cutting corners on. We pulled it and reworked all the products. And I will tell you, the credibility that we earned with that distributor after that was remarkable. As they said, they're going to do what's right. They're going to do what's right for the customers. They're going to do what's right for us. They're going to do what's right for employees. It's actually still talked about. One of the guys that worked in the company was the head of sales. I saw him about 6 months ago, and he's still telling that story.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second one is around speed and implementation. And so there's sometimes you have to move very, very quickly in an organization in a turnaround. But if you lose the team, it doesn't matter. So I can give you a couple stories there if you'd like them. But and those, if they're on this call today, they could probably laugh and tell you some of the stories. But and I think a lot of the leaders you've had on these calls, it's a classic mistake you make, is you move too quickly. And so it's one of the things that I've learned where speed's important in some areas. Explaining why we're doing what we're doing helps with speed, because if team members don't know why we're doing what we're doing, they're just not going to be able to move as quickly as you'd like them to. But explaining why you're doing what you're doing is really helpful.
Yeah, I think that kind of ties into expectations. So in a lot of your roles, you've come in as the new leader, and you look around the organization, and the level of expectations that exist at all levels of the company historically have been at, let's say a 5 or a 6, and you're trying to drive improvement, purposeful improvement, and by definition, you set the bar higher than where it has been before, which sort of forces this quote unquote productive tension. But in many people's eyes, maybe it's not productive tension. And it starts to expose maybe some of the people on your team that you talked about earlier, where they have some of these characteristics where they'll make excuses or they'll say why things don't work, because they're used to performing at a certain level. And growth, if you think about all sorts of growth, whether that you're an athlete or growing a business, it comes with some level of discomfort, pain. And in case of athletics, it's physical discomfort. Why? Because you're doing something different that the body hasn't experienced. So how do you prepare, your point about going fast, how do you prepare the organization for the type of change needed? And I think you have an added degree of complexity in private equity where you don't have the leisure of time,
Mm.
and you have to bring people along so that when you turn around, like, you haven't lost anybody on the mission. Like, we're all my people go. We move so fast that we lost half of them on the journey up to the mountain. So how do you do both? How do you set a higher expectations because the organization isn't where it needs to be? How do you not lose people? So how do you balance those things?
It's hard. Anybody tells you that being a leader is easy, um, they're lying or they don't understand it. It's very difficult. So one of the things I think is important is focusing in the critical few areas of the organization where you need to drive an impact. And so that's number one, is focusing things and allowing the organization not to focus on certain things. So prioritizing a lot of things where those things are going to get done in time. Here's what we absolutely have to work on. That's the first thing. The second thing is giving the organization permission to fail and to make mistakes. Because when you make mistakes, you've made a decision. One of the issues in organizations is they don't make decisions. And so when you allow people to fail, come in, say, I screwed up, here's what I've done, but here's how I'm correcting that. That is a lower risk decision. Go make it on your own. If it's a high risk decision, bring it in. We're all going to have a conversation around that. So I think the interesting thing, Damien, is you got to set that up front, that here's what we're going to work on. The other things we're just not going to do. Give everybody permission and tell them why we're not going to work on those things. And you've got to just communicate very effectively where here are the issues in the business, and be very, very upfront and transparent. I know everybody says transparency is like, it's an overused term, but the more direct you are, treat people like professional adults. Give them the information. Let them know here's the journey we're going on. It's going to be tough. You want them to be a part of the journey. If some people don't want to be a part of the journey, that's okay. It doesn't mean they're not capable. It doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean that this, that they're not worthy of going on the journey. It just means it's not a good fit for them. You want people culturally that want to be on the journey of change with you, and you need to serve them along the way. And once they've made the decision to be on the journey, you talked early about failure, but you bring it up. It's part of this conversation too, Damon, where by definition, by definition, improvement in any state you're in comes from failure or stress. The Kaizen, a Kaizen by definition, the first 3 days are brutal.
Yeah.
They're awful. People are unbelievably frustrated. Then a breakthrough occurs, usually Wednesday, Thursday. Okay. It's the same thing in athletics. You stress yourself to build muscle capability, neurological pathways in athletics. The same thing in a lean transformation or change. There's got to be a stressor or a productive tension or a failure to improve on something. By definition, lean organizations are constantly failure organizations. They don't run from failure and view that as a negative. They view it as a positive. Oh, what did I learn? What did I learn? I made a change. It didn't work like I thought it was going to be. Okay, make another one. Keep going. And so they're failure decision organizations. Giving people permission to do that around customers, internal and external, that's how you do it.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I think it's a great insight, and I think that those organizations, they're also instigating failure, not like they're setting the standard higher to create the condition of we haven't achieved what we need to, which
Yeah,
you could say is failure, whatever term you want to call it. It's like we still have more work to do. But I kind of go back to that 1 inch thing you talked about earlier, like the neural pathways, like the organization that goes through all of those changes over years and decades and this kind of thing looks back at that 1 inch decision differently. um, 20 years later. It's just like we're going to Kaizen this thing for the 100th time, and nobody thinks that's crazy. It's just necessary in order to compete and stay relevant.
That's
And
right.
to me, that's one of the biggest misunderstandings about lean is like lean is this destination of it's a task that you can complete and check off as being done.
It's impossible to be done.
Yeah,
It is by definition, because the external environment's changing, your internal environment's changing, you're constantly evolving to serve your customers. Things change. It
yeah,
means you have to change. And so creating those higher standards in the organization to allow people to achieve those. I mean, one of the finest things for me as a leader is seeing people reach their full potential. There's no greater thrill as a leader than that. Where you create a standard, they don't think they're going to hit it. And when you say to them, I'm going to be there with you every step of the way to do it, that's even better.
yeah,
Because sometimes they're coming into your office or you're on a call and they are just at their knees of, I can't do this anymore. You say, let's take a step back. Where are you? What have we tried? What's your team tried? Where are you at from a decision making perspective? What ideas are coming in that maybe you haven't implemented? And part of lean, Damon, is it's a simplification of thoughts and ideas, because you have a lot of smart people in organizations, and everybody overcomplicates things. And the better you simplify things, the more effective you are. And
yeah,
and I'll simplify lean into one kind of a statement that my father had told me a long time ago. It's put one foot in front of the other. That's all you got to do. That's what lean is. You put
yeah.
one foot in front of the other, and
Progress.
every day you just get better from yesterday. All you do is got to make it better, just a little bit.
Yeah. I didn't hear in your description, here's the answer. And I know that, I know you're doing that on purpose. Like you're teaching a way of thinking to people, like you're coaching a new way of thinking to people versus stepping in as the hero with the answer for the organization. Like how important is that culturally?
So it's actually your question is really an important one that I remember. It's probably my second or third team that I was working with, and somebody came into my office. They're like, "How do you want it done?" And I said, "It's not going to help you if I tell you how I want it done. How do you think this should be done? Because there's multiple getting from point A to point B. There's multiple ways we can get there." My philosophy was, I'm better off sitting back. I have an idea in my mind on how this should be done. That means that's 100% from point A to point B, at which I think it should be done. If that individual comes into my office and we're having a conversation and they're 50% and they're not going to achieve the goal, I'm going to have a conversation that gets them from the 50% to the 70%. I'm not going to give them the answer. I'm going to ask them questions. How do you get from 50% to 70% of achieving the goal or objective you need to with yourself individually or your team? And at the end of the day, and I had a conversation with someone well about this. He said, John, you deliberately were okay with them getting to 80% or 85% of the answer. And I said, it's better that they get there at 80 to 85%. It's better for them and their team to give them maximum empowerment where they feel like they came up with it, than get them to another 15%. It's not worth it,
Mm-hmm.
because the next problem they're going to improve on it. It's going to get to 90%. That's how you build teams and culture.
Yeah.
And
And
so that's the way I look at it, is it's very, if they're coming in and they're really struggling and they're not getting that fit, they're at 50, 60%, we're not going to meet it. We pull back, we start asking questions. But if they're coming in and they come in if we got them to 80%, I'm done. We're good. Go to the next one, because they're feeling empowered. And that's what matters in lean. You
Yeah.
empower your teams. They're closest to the customer, internal, external. They have more information.
And they're going to own that outcome if
They're
it's
going to
their
own
own
it.
idea. Yeah,
They're going
100%.
to own it.
All right, so we got several questions here from the audience. So again, I'll remind people on the call, you can type in your questions into the GoToWebinar question box, and I will read these aloud. So the first question is, what advice would you give people, or what one-liners would you use to sell CEOs on the potential that lean can bring to an organization that maybe are on the fence about going this journey that you're talking about?
Um, One-liners. This is not a one-liner answer. It's one of the things that I think a lot of CEOs look at as, well, what we're doing is not working. Okay. Well, what's your idea around change? Well, we're going to do this, this, and this. Their strategy always makes sense. Everybody's strategy always makes sense because they're very smart people doing it. Where it all falls down is in execution. Lean is a way how you execute your priorities in your business to strip waste out for customers, internal or external. Why wouldn't you do it? Do you have a better? I often say this: if you have a better idea, bring it forward because we're gonna implement it. That's what a lean culture does. I say to some of these CEOs that are on the fence, like, I'm not sure. I said, do you have a better idea? You know what they say, Damon? They don't have a better idea. So my answer is, well, that's your answer. Go do it.
Yeah. Next question, how does company success, historical company success, work against a company in terms of embarking on this kind of journey, if you will? So this is for companies that are successful without having this way of thinking. So they might be in a market where they have a dominant technology and a lot of their success is attributed to the product versus the actual things that they're doing internally to stay relevant over time. And we could probably list a bunch of companies that fit that, like Blockbuster versus Netflix, going on and on and on. So
Yeah.
how does success work against you as a leader in terms of driving change in an organization?
Yeah. That's when you should be doing it, is when you're at the highest peak in the evolution of the company. There was a book back in the day called Barbarians to Bureaucrats, and it goes through cycles of evolution. This was written in the late 90s on different life cycles of companies. And the problem with high gross margin, highly successful top line growth businesses is they don't think they need this because it's cost takeout. Well, again, I go back to the fundamentals of what is lean. It's around waste elimination for your customers. And so part of that is there's an arrogance of we don't need to change. And then when you actually need to change, it's too late.
Yeah.
So you want to do it when you're like Michael Jordan at the top of their game, or like Tiger Woods. I'll tell you, one of the most sophisticated lean organizations out there is Amazon. And I have firsthand knowledge of that. They are constantly driving improvements for their customers.
They're maniacal about customers.
And by the way, they're very successful. Again, it goes back to this cultural piece. And they've got pretty good margins and very good cash flow because of their working capital uh, situation. We could talk for hours about that, but
All right, John, that was a fast hour. So I feel like I could go on for several hours.
that
So
was a fast hour.
we'll have
That
to do
was a fast hour.
2.0 version here. So I want to thank you for taking time with us. And before we bid farewell to you all, I want to encourage you all to take a moment and reflect on the valuable lessons that John has given us today and shared with us, and how you may apply those to your organization's own lean journeys. If you have any further questions or would like to explore the possibilities of initiating a lean transformation journey yourself, or maybe rebooting or getting back on the right track, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to support you. Once again, I want to thank John for taking time with us and taking part in this interview series. And we hope to see you all again next month in our next edition of Lean Catalyst, and wish you all success in your own lean transformation journeys as well. Thanks, John. It's good seeing you again.
Damon, good seeing you. Thanks again for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
I did as well. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Take care.
You will.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.